what's going on? I'm on my way to the gym. I like to switch up my workouts between outdoors and indoor. You know, they both have their pros and cons. Being outside, the beautiful weather and the freedom of movement that comes along with that. You feel the wind on your hair and on your face and the sun. You know, there's definitely a health component. Some of the limitations, you don't have all the equipment that you might need. You know, if you're gonna do weighted calisthenic or any other kind of weighted movements, you gotta bring that stuff with you to the workout park. So it's easier to do weighted movements at the gym as well as supplemental movements like various forms of cable type exercises. So today I'm gonna be doing a pushing workout, really focusing on overhead vertical pushing strength. So one of my biggest goals right now, at least pushing goals, is to master the freestanding handstand push-up. I've been working on my handstand now for a handful of years. And so I'm able to actually hold a handstand for a good minute pretty consistently. You know, it's something I'm still working on kind of every day and maintaining, but my primary focus now is to improve my overhead vertical pushing strength, primarily starting against the wall and then regressing the move over the course of a workout and I get as much volume as possible. I have tried doing a fair amount of overhead pressing with external weights like dumbbells and barbell, but I find that it doesn't completely translate in the necessary movement pattern or needed for the handstand push-up itself. You know, if you compare the two, the handstand push-up is more away from the body as opposed to a barbell press. Some of the weighted moves I have been doing though that I think do kind of mimic it a little bit more is overhead plate press, being able to hold both sides of a weight plate. The lower you go demands and forces you to hold the weight out in front of you more than with a barbell. I've also got a pretty unique little attachment that you can actually stack weight plates on top of each other and have them secured so that you progressively overload in a safe way. So that's a primary goal of mine right now, is to achieve the freestanding handstand push-up. I do realize that even once I build up enough strength to do 10, for example, reps, chest to wall, face all the way to the floor and back up, once I have that level of strength, then I feel like I'll be ready to 1 rep freestanding handstand. Even though I have the balance to hold the handstand for a good minute, and once I do get the strength, there's still gonna be the challenge of descending and ascending and maintaining the balance throughout that period of the movement. It's not just being able to hold the handstand at the top and having the strength, and then of course, you magically can do the handstand push-up. There's a transition period. As the balance gets mixed with the strength component, that's kind of a skill in and of itself. I'm excited to learn that at one point, but I feel like in the beginning here, I need to primarily focus on maintaining my balance as well as really improving my strength. And then once I'm at an adequate level of strength, I can combine the two. So that's gonna be a primary focus today. I'm gonna do 10 sets of 1 rep chest to wall push-up, at which point I'll regress the movement to feet elevated pike push-up. And I'll probably also raise my hands on some weight plates, just so that I can get into a bit of a deficit to get a little bit extra tension on my shoulders. So we'll see how it goes. So that's kind of the focus of today, is to work on my handstand push-up strength. So I'll show you guys a little bit of the footage and we'll see how it goes from there. All right, so as always, I'm just doing a quick full body warm up here before jumping into the training session. This generally doesn't take any more than 5 to 10 minutes. My goal here is to get the blood flowing throughout my body and loosen up any areas that feel especially tight or restricted. Because calisthenics heavily emphasizes full body activation and rigidity during most movement patterns for optimal performance, it's important to spend a few initial minutes dedicated to mobilizing our extremities in preparation to support the upcoming training demand. This means not only hamstrings, hips, chest, shoulders, and neck, but also down to the finer joints and hinges such as toes and fingers. The biggest setback we can incur in our pursuit of fitness is injury. While warming up doesn't ensure an injury-proof session, it greatly minimizes the potential. Plus, it grants the added benefit toward performance output and ultimately strength gains. Here I'm just spending a minute hanging from a bar to lengthen out my spine. One arm hangs do a fantastic job of opening up the sides of the body purely through the weight of gravity. And lastly, I spent a minute or two with a focus on my wrists, since today's training will be largely spent upside down, bearing the weight of my body. I started with a couple less than maximum handstand holds to further warm up my shoulders, acclimate myself to being inverted, and have a little pre-strength training fun practicing one of my favorite bodyweight skills. There's nothing quite like the feeling of balancing one's body upside down. Getting my first muscle up was a huge achievement, but I think balancing a handstand is more rewarding. So as I touched on earlier in the car, today's focus is handstand push-ups, specifically the strength component. Followed by the previous warm-up protocols, I begin by performing a single set of pike push-ups to acclimate my shoulders to the upcoming increase in demand. If you guys haven't tried pike push-ups yet, they're much more challenging than they appear. If you truly go forward of your hands with your head to create a sort of tripod, your shoulders will certainly feel it. I will say that for me, these feel much stronger than they appear here in the footage. Next up, I set up depth progression using a stack of small weight plates. I placed the stack about 3 foot lengths away from the wall, which seems to work well for my height coupled with the length of my limbs. The goal here is to successfully perform 1 full eccentric and concentric rep down to the height of the top plate, followed by removing that plate until I've allowed my forehead to touch the ground, or in this case, towel. Again, this is a way to safely progress the start of the training session. The number of weight plates you use is really a matter of your current level of strength. Once I made it to the floor, I began the 10 sets of 1 full rep that I've outlined for myself in this workout. You can see how my mid to low back region collapses as I push up from the bottom of the rep. I know that this is a compensation due to a weakness in my overhead pushing strength as I'm offloading the demand from my shoulders onto the musculature of my back. This is definitely something I'm excited to improve upon over time. Second to this, keeping my elbows tucked in closer to my body throughout the rep is also a form adjustment as my strength increases. I didn't film all 10 sets, but at the 4th set in, I started to add an extra eccentric rep after each full rep. The goal here is to accumulate extra time under tension after each full rep, despite not performing a second complete rep. After completing all 10 sets, I performed another 5 eccentric only reps. Fighting gravity here is a real battle, but if you value your nose and face, you'll push the floor away with your life. Next up is feet elevated pike push-ups with a deficit as a regression. As I mentioned prior, the benefit of training in a traditional indoor gym is the available access to a multitude of equipment. I've found that for the elevated pike push-ups, the distance that my forehead needs to travel in order to maintain that proper tripod positioning at the bottom of each rep is for this exercise setup 4 foot lengths away from the box, as opposed to only 3 in the prior exercise. Here I'm stacking 2 45-pound plates on each side to elevate my hands to achieve the aforementioned deficit. Although this exercise is significantly easier to perform than those stomach-to-wall handstand push-ups, having already executed quite a few max effort sets prior made this a worthy challenge. Here I performed 5x5, 5 sets of 5 reps. I should mention that in this exercise and in the exercise prior, I maintained a strict 3-minute rest between sets. One thing I enjoy about these higher rep sets compared to the first exercise is the noticeable muscle pump because of the greater time under tension. While those single rep sets are an all-out effort and more of a give it everything you've got movement, here I can better feel the targeted muscle fibers in my upper chest and shoulders. I suppose this borders the line between strength versus hypertrophy training. Next up is standing overhead plate press. As I mentioned earlier in the video, pressing overhead with a weight plate forces you to keep the weight out in front of you as you lower down more so than when using a barbell or dumbbells. Plus, the change in grip was a welcomed adjustment on my wrists after having been upside down. I also had briefly mentioned earlier in the video the piece of equipment I have which allows for securely stacking weight plates. However, I'll have to demonstrate that in a subsequent video, as today the goal of this exercise was purely hypertrophy and a single 45-pound plate was enough. As for the structure, I performed 3 max sets to technical failure. The primary movement goal here is to bring the plate down as low as possible while keeping the plate as flat and as parallel to the ground as possible. This is what forces you to keep it out away from the body, which is what mimics the angle of motion in the handstand push-up. Looking back here at the footage, I can tell that in many of these reps I lost the flatness in the plate near the bottom of the reps. The next and last regression in today's handstand push-up training is this exercise here. I don't believe this exercise has an official name. It's more or less a bent arm plank, but with my hands closer to my waist, along with one supported knee on the ground and the other leg extended back. The point here is to once again accumulate additional time under tension in the bottom position of the handstand push-up. I do acknowledge that performing pike push-up lift-offs would have been a more ideal exercise. However, at this point in the workout, I no longer had enough strength left to adequately train that, and therefore performed these instead as a regression. I know that my weakest link in my handstand push-up training right now is at the bottom of the angle, when my face is closest to the ground. Performing this exercise as an isometric hold for time was a great finisher to this workout, and one that I know has helped along in my handstand push-up journey thus far. For reference, I performed 2 sets on both left and right knees, 1 minute in duration each. While this looks simple and easy, the intensity and burn is real. If you're still here watching the video, thank you for your time. I truly appreciate the support. Don't forget to subscribe, and as they say, smash that like button for the next video. Thanks guys, take care.